r/ask Reddit. Historians of Reddit. What's a devastating event that no one talks about? Galveston, Texas was once considered to be one of the most important commercial ports in the United States and was referred to by several fantastical names such as the Queen City of the Gulf and the Wall Street of the West. All that changed when it suffered a near direct hit from a devastating Category 4 hurricane in 1900, the deadliest natural disaster in American history. Pretty much the entire city was destroyed by a storm surge and anywhere from 8,000 to 12,000 people died. Galveston was rebuilt, but it never truly regained its status. Houston became the state's commercial center in the storm's wake, in addition to other factors. There's a great book about this called Isaac's Storm by Eric Larson. Also Dark Water Rising. Baghdad used to be one of the biggest and most vibrant cities in the world in the 1200s, until the Mongols came. Baghdad did not recover its year 1200 population until the 1980s. It was, in fact, the most populous city in the world for quite some time during the Middle Ages. It was also the epicenter of intellectual, cultural, and artistic exchange for scholars and other brilliant thinkers the world over. And then, of course, the Mongols came. I'm always amazed that people know so little about Pol Pot and Cambodia. His regime killed 25% of its population. Let that sink in. 1 in 4. If you were educated, you were first killed. When my mom was in college, she had a Cambodian classmate who was studying with her while his wife and child stayed in Cambodia. When shit started going down, he insisted on returning to Cambodia to get his family out. My mom begged him not to go, and my dad, who was dating my mom at the time and had returned from serving in the Vietnam War just a few years earlier, even offered to go instead to try to get them out. He went anyway. As soon as my mom heard that they were killing the educated people and folks with glasses, she knew she would never see her friend again. He wore glasses. Before he left, he gifted my mom charcoal rubbings he took at Angkor Wat. They are treasured by her to this day, and the only physical evidence she has that her friend existed. I grew up hearing this story. We remember him and his family and pray for them. We may be the only living people who remember them. This was long before I was born, but I will carry his story after my mom passes. We owe it to each other. Cambodian genocide. They killed so many kids that the life expectancy was 18. They killed people with glasses for being intellectuals too, if I recall correctly. When you thought somebody had to die because they were an intellectual but they actually just need their glasses to read the menu at McDonald's from more than 5 feet away without struggling. As someone who is legit blind, I still cannot see why glasses are so associated with academia while other health aids are associated with medicine and disability. It's a weird distinction. Like, I don't wear my glasses because I'm scholarly. I wear them so people have faces and aren't just big head-shaped blobs. Typing Heavenly Kingdom of Hongzhiquan. Put simply, it was an usurp kingdom in 1850s China that directly and indirectly led to the deaths of millions, maybe 10 million plus of people through massacre and famine. Hongzhiquan believed he was the younger brother of Jesus Christ and persuaded enough people to follow along and start a civil war. Check out God's Chinese Son by Jonathan Spence. The Taiping Rebellion is one of the most extraordinary events in human history that is virtually unheard of in the West. Perhaps as many as 70 million people died in the conflict. The Taipings were truly revolutionary, as they demanded absolute equality between women and men. When they conquered a city, they would give the inhabitants a choice to join them or die. Those that chose not to join were killed. All of them. The conflict lasted for 21 years, 1850 to 1871, and may be the second deadliest war in human history. Literally no one knows about it. The Bronze Age collapse. Arguably more devastating than the fall of the West Roman Empire. So much knowledge lost. Truly one of history's great mysteries. I recommend reading up on it. It's really interesting. Until I learned about it, I had no idea that there was once a whole other Dark Ages that happened before what we normally think of as the Dark Ages. Although that term is a misnomer, the Bronze Age collapse ushered in a centuries-long Dark Age that lasted until classical Greece. The Andijan massacre of 2005 in Uzbekistan. It is largest mass shooting in Asia since Tiananmen Square, with over 1,000 killed and even more wounded. The Uzbek government forcefully silenced reform protests by firing into the crowd and then kicked out 90% of Westerners in the country when the US governed UN tried to investigate. Terrible loss of life that rarely gets remembered because the Uzbek government tried so hard to cover it up. Man, I'm from Kazakhstan and heard about every other thing mentioned in comments but not shit that happened right in the neighboring country. The Mayan society and the lost scriptures that we still haven't found on top of the scriptures we still can't seem to decipher. And basically just how much culture was torched by Spain during the Conquista and the colonial period. Frankly, I'm amazed the Maya language is still alive. And torched quite literally. We're lucky the codices that survived did so. The disease outbreaks that hit the Americas with the arrival of the Europeans. You hear about a 90% death rate and it sounds made up. But whatever the actual number was, entire civilizations were literally wiped out. Cultures that had existed for thousands of years are just gone. With barely a record left, you have stories of people coming across whole villages of corpses. These people died never even having seen the Europeans, never knowing what was killing them and their loved ones and totally helpless to do anything about it. The book 1491 touches on this. Apparently Native Americans weren't a bunch of primitive nomadic tribes. There were cities and terraformed land and rich cultures. But when the Europeans arrived, diseases spread ahead of their advance. So by the time the Europeans would arrive in an area, it had already been decimated by epidemics and whoever was left was living in post-apocalyptic survival mode. China during World War II, the Japanese absolutely decimated the areas they occupied during the war, not just through rape and murder but through biological warfare that resulted in the slow death of hundreds of thousands of people largely forgotten by history. I'm not in any way a supporter of the current Chinese government, but I feel like where there it is a response not only to communist government tyranny of the Mao era, but to the horrific Japanese atrocities that allowed it to happen in the first place. The number of people I've met who literally deny that the Nanjing massacre happened is insane. Ridiculous. Not just the rape of Nanking. There's people who literally worked in Japanese biological weapons facilities that are responsible for direct torture and murder of subjects referred to colloquially as marauder logs that still to this day deny any wrongdoing. Scores of people were abducted, tortured and eventually killed to fuel Imperial Japan's warfare endeavors, and yet so many war criminals were allowed to basically just walk away at the end of it all just because of the growing fear of communism. Ask my history studying friend about this. She said there's a lot of events that people don't talk about. For example, there was a lot of countries involved in the Balkan conflict who knew about the massacre of Srebrenica but still allowed it to happen. So many historical events are just so grim and depressing when you read about it. We knew bad things were happening but didn't stop until it was too late for many people. The role of the Netherlands in the massacre is often heavily overlooked when this massacre is taught honestly. The Rwandan genocide has got to be one of these events. I watched Shake Hands with the Devil here a while ago and highly recommend it. Unspeakable acts of brutality inflicted. Still gives me chills. The assassination of James Garfield. He was a known advocate for racial equality. He appointed black men into his cabinet and tried expanding public education into the South to get more African Americans in education. He tried to fight for racial equality but died 4 months into his presidency, which tucked it up. Candace Millard's Destiny of the Republic not only does an excellent job of recounting these events, but postulates that Garfield had potential to be one of America's best presidents. Instead he died a half-rotten husk, all because his doctors refused to practice sanitation. Also not a historian, but learning about the Beslan school siege in Russia was heartbreaking. As kids were settling down for the first day of the class, the school was attacked by Chechen terrorists. I think over 300 people, half of whom were kids, died over the course of 3 days. Most of those kids died during the assault on the school by Russian military forces. If you look at previous resolutions of hostage crises by Russian military and security forces, you'll see why so many people died at Beslan. The Milan Conference. Back in 1880, a bunch of educators of the deaf all decided to meet in Milan to determine how best to teach deaf people. 164 delegates were in attendance, only one of whom was deaf. At the time, There was a conflict among educators of deaf people about whether an oralism or manualism based approach was better. Proponents of oralism argued that deaf people would never succeed in society if they could not speak and hold a conversation in the same way a hearing person would. To this end, anyone who attempted to sign would be punished, and deaf people were forced to lip read. At the end of the conference, sign language was banned in all educational institutions, and deaf people were not allowed to teach, for fear that it would encourage the use of sign language. As a result, for roughly 100 years, deaf people were essentially isolated from communication and unable to form communities. To this day, amongst older generations of deaf people, many still have never learned to sign. In addition, deaf culture as a whole was and is profoundly affected by this event, because it essentially stole stories that had been passed down from generation to generation, erasing the history of deaf people and the deaf community. The blinding of 15,000 soldiers. The Bulgarians and Byzantines would clash every couple of years, and after one battle the Byzantine leader just snapped and cut out the eyes of the soldiers that surrendered, then sent them back home. The Bulgarian leader died upon hearing the news. No, this is wildly over-exaggerated, and the emperor didn't just snap. Basil II, or Basil the Bulgar Slayer, was the emperor of the Roman Empire in the early 1000s AD and is largely considered one of the greatest Roman emperors. He is largely famous for his completion of the reconquest of the Bulgarian Empire, a difficult campaign that took up most of his life due to the mountainous Macedonian country he was fighting in. During one of these campaigns, he captured a contingent of Bulgarian troops, size unknown. He then proceeded to blind 99 out of 100 of them and left the last man with one eye to guide the rest back home. No one is sure if this story is true or not, but we can say for sure that 15,000 troops is a huge overstatement. It was unlikely that the Bulgarians were even able to muster 5,000 troops. At the end of the day, this is just a myth, maybe based in some truth, that has been over-exaggerated throughout the years. The Armenian Greek-Assyrian genocide, 1915, by the Ottomans. Around 1.5 million people died, either from the genocide itself or the concentration camps. Anil tabulary. It's not yet officially recognized. Contemporary Turkey denies it happened. The Kadinka tragedy was supposed to be a celebration of the crowning of Nicholas II as emperor. Around 500,000 people gathered in a field where they would receive free food. Rumors spread that there wouldn't be enough food for everyone, leading to a panic and everyone rushing the field. 1,389 people were trampled to death. Nicholas II responded by going to a party that night. He and his wife didn't want to go to the ball, but his advisors and his powerful uncles insisted, so they went anyway. Apparently both spent the ball with red-rimmed eyes. Not that this excuses their behavior, but their initial reactions were to mourn the loss of their people. We talk a lot about Columbine and Sandy Hook, but few people nowadays remember the 1927 bombing of the school in Bath, Michigan, or the explosion of a school in New London, Texas in 1937 that, in addition to killing almost 300 people, launched the career of a cub reporter named Walter Cronkite. The Bath massacre was mostly done with dynamite, wired into the school by a disgruntled janitor who also killed his wife and some of his livestock. And the New London disaster is why natural gas, which is odorless, has an unpleasant smelling gas added to it. Some people who went to parts of the school in the days preceding the blast complained of headaches and dizziness, but nobody could figure out why. Whoa, you made it to the end? You're a ducking beast. I'll cut you a deal. Smash like and subscribe for more curated content, bruh. It's free and that's a great price.